Tātou, nau mai haere mai ki tēnei hui o te kaunihera arohe o te matau a Māui, tēnei te mihi kia koutou. Just a warm welcome for our Regional Council meeting today, and we will start together with our karakia. Please join in. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi ake ana te ata kura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei mauri ora. Kia ora koutou. Just some housekeeping matters. This meeting is being live streamed on Council's Facebook page and recorded for viewing at a later date on our YouTube channel. In the event of an earthquake, cover and hold. If the shaking is long or strong, when the shaking subsides, leave the building through the nearest exit and proceed immediately towards the Napier Hill along Dalton Street to Tiffin Park, continuing up the steps to Cameron Road. For evacuation, if an emergency alarm sounds, immediately evacuate the building through the nearest exit and proceed to the assembly area on the grass at the corner of Dalton and Voltaire Streets. Emergency exits are clearly signposted. Wharepaku are located down the hall to the left of the chambers entrance. That in mind, there are apologies for the absence of Tanya Hopmans. Are there any other apologies for this meeting?
Just a notice, I'll be leaving at 3:15. I have to leave at 3:15, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Leaving at 3:15. Councillor Yurifan Bake, I think will be late. Oh no, there you are.
He's here.
I was looking at your marker. Lovely to have you join us online, thank you. And we have Philip online also. Can I have a mover and a seconder to receive Tanya Hopman's apologies? Councillor Williams and Councillor McIntosh. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Are there any conflicts of interest in relation to today's items on the agenda to declare? Councillor Harding.
Kia ora, Chair. Look, I'll just declare an interest in respect of item 9, Councillor's remuneration, seeing as I'm in part responsible for that item.
Thank you. That will be noted, and most of us are conflicted in that one, but you particular in your new position. Thank you. Are there any other conflicts to declare? None. Thank you. Confirmation of the minutes from the 25th of October Council meeting. Are there any alterations to be made to those minutes? If there are none, Councillor Sears, would you like to move? And Councillor Harding, second. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Call for minor items. Councillor McIntosh.
Chair, I'd just like to speak to the Zone 3 meeting we had at the Central North Island Councils a week or so back.
Great. I'll add that to the list and we'll address them at the end of the meeting. Councillor Lambert.
Yes, Chair. I'd just like to give the Wairau Flood Protection Stakeholder Group update from a meeting held just Monday gone, 27th of November.
Thank you, Councillor. Both noted. Any further? None. All right. We move into our decision items. The first decision item is regarding the draft revenue and finance policy for consultation. Nick, would you like to start us? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, this paper really gets you to the nub of a process that you've been going through for the last 12 to 18 months, doing a really thorough overhaul of Council's way of setting its rate, or the way it apportions its rates, and you've looked really thoroughly through an extensive workshop set at how that occurs. That process is now at the point where this item brings before you some draft changes to the revenue and financing policy, some draft changes to remissions and postponement policies, and a proposed community consultation process to then understand the views of the community so that you can then consider them through a submissions and hearings process through the next few months. I will hand over to the staff here to take you through the item.
Kia ora, Council. So this item, as Nick said, is to ask you to adopt a suite of documents related to the review of our revenue and financing policy. So this is the culmination of 18 months of review. And it was the previous council started the project, probably, I think our first meeting was in April 2022. And then was picked up again by this council earlier this year to review what had been done by the previous council and then move into step 2 of a very prescribed process. In front of you is the draft revenue and financing policy, which has been marked up with the proposed changes. The draft breaks remission and postponement policies, the consultation document, and the supporting information. Happy to take questions, or if you'd like, through Chair, go through the main points. What would you prefer to do?
I think we can take this as read, but open up for questions or clarifications of the paper and what's asked of us. And we have Philip online, our expert, revenue and finance policy expert. So thank you for joining us. Councillor Roadley, thank you.
Kia ora, and thank you, team, for pulling this together. A huge amount of work, and we appreciate what sits in behind. Under the communication and engagement plan for consultation, 39.3, great to see that you have pulled out some interest groups that need specific awareness. How do you go about engaging with those groups? Is that at the industry or sort of at the high level, or do you mean the ratepayers within those groups?
I can answer that. We have a direct mail going out to some interested parties, as well as an email where we have email addresses as well. So our distribution lists, as you call them, we have our consent holders who pay the freshwater science charges. That's one group. We have a number of ratepayers who are probably the most affected by the changes from a financial level, either from potentially paying more or paying less. We are targeting special interest groups like we've worked with our rural team to get rural advisory groups. The call to action to them will be to forward it on to their members as well. So we'll provide them with an email that they can forward on, or direct them to our Facebook, one of our social media posts that they can share with their groups. We have our Tai Whenua representatives as well, both within the Māori Committee and the Regional Planning Committee. And the call to action would be the same, to share it with their members and their groups. And obviously we'll send it to other councils. And I think I've captured all of the groups of people, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Harding.
Kia ora, Chair. You beat me even to myself. I will. I'm good to go. So my question. Thank you. Look, this as an incoming councillor, partway through the process, essentially at the end of step 1 and the start of step 2, I have not been here for the whole of the process, but I have been mightily impressed by the thoroughness of the process and the quality of the advice and support from staff and consultants along the way. So well done. That does not, however, mean that I'm happy with everything. At this stage, I just want to query the record at 22, para 22, where it indicates that the new council was tasked with reviewing the step 1 analysis and either reconfirming it or amending it. To my recollection, we, the incoming council, were never given the opportunity to amend the step 1 analysis. It was very much a closed book with the commentary or the response to my questions being, will we get a chance at step 2 in an overall balancing to have a look at that? So I want to put it on record that there are some step 1 determinations here that I simply don't agree with. Thank you. But also, my question is, was I missing something? Was it actually a step where we were provided that opportunity and I simply missed it? Because I don't believe I did. Thank you.
Who would like to have a go?
I can have a go,
Thank you,
and then I
Desiree.
might defer to Philip. So through, if I point you to the draft revenue and financing policy, in the appendix, the table talks about step 1 and step 2. And there are some things in step 1 that the council have changed through the later half that we have revised in the step 1 process. I'll give you an example, if I can think of one. So through the work you did, when you looked at all of the cumulative changes, we did make some changes to the step 1 process, and they are reflected in the current appendix to this policy. So you've done it, you didn't do it as, you were presented the step 1 funding needs analysis, and we stayed with it until you'd seen all the cumulative impacts, and then we changed some things to the step 1 process.
Well, that's describing a slightly different process, but anyway, look, I'll just simply leave it at this point, is that I have made some very clear and what I believe is important points around the burden sharing, particularly around our sustainable land management and biodiversity, which aren't reflected in the positions we are now. Thank you.
Philip, would you like to add any further, given you've been at every workshop?
No, nothing further. Just agree with what you said, Desiree. The issue is that doesn't preclude, right, from when council comes to adopt the final policy, to consider both individual collective decisions over both step 1 and step 2. The issue that I have, not the issue, the suggestion I have is, does what the councillor is actually requesting change the ultimate outcome in terms of what rates are being proposed? I mean, I think that's the critical factor. We might have actually taken the councillor's considerations under advisement and considered as part of the overall step 2 process. So changing step 1 would be a more of an academic process rather than actually adding any significant changes to the overall result of what we've landed in terms of the type and allocation of rates.
Thank you. Councillor Sears.
Thank you, Chair. I'll save my comments for later. I just wanted to pick up back to Councillor Roadley's discussion on engagement. When letters go out or people community see this advertised and have questions or want to submit, what opportunity is there for them actually to have discussions with staff, or is there a format in which maybe an open morning, et cetera, a lot of information in there, which I have to admit has been really well presented, thank you. If particular interest groups or just individual ratepayers want to have conversations, is that available, and how, please?
I can answer that. Yes, we have first of all, we have a FAQ. We will have an FAQ section on our website. Hopefully that will field most of the questions that people may ask. However, they do want to contact any of the team directly. They will have both an email address, which is haveyoursay@hbrc.govt, and we've got .nz, and we've got multiple people monitoring that, and they will be able to call in. Our customer experience team have been briefed to put calls through to a number of people, depending on their availability, to answer specific questions if we can help them out.
Thank you. Can I ask a second question? Sure. The revenue and finance policies are reviewed reasonably regularly. It's been a long time since this one has been done. And I suppose my question is, those of you who've been in this a long time, probably you, Philip, mainly, is there a change within communities around understandings of work streams and how things work that are constantly being reflected in the way that these types of policies are used in what may have been viewed as suitable for one group of people to pay 20 years ago may well have changed through our different views of things. Is that why we review these regularly, and is that how we approach it?
So I totally agree. The answer is legally you are required to review it every 3 years in conjunction with your long-term plan. So the idea is that the long-term plan sets what you're proposing over the next 10 years, with an emphasis on the first 3. So therefore the revenue and financing policy should actually align to what is being delivered over the next 3 to 10 years. As you know, you don't want to go through this every 3 years. So generally there is minor modification made on a 3-yearly basis with a review around the 9 to 10 year mark of the anniversary of a full revenue and financing policy.
Yes.
Hope that answers your question.
It does, thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Councillor Foley.
Thank you, Chair. So exactly when was this last done in this council, this process?
We know that it hasn't been done from a first principles point of view for at least 4 long-term plans, so that would be 12 years. And we can tell from how the policy reads, the existing policy, that it does have old language in it, so that, so it's at least 12 years that it's been done to bring it up to date with the current legislation and best practice. It has been through reviews. In fact, Philip was engaged to ensure it was legally tight, maybe to either the last LTP, the LTP before. So it's had some minor amendments along the way, but it hasn't had a full review. And I've been here, I think, coming up 7 years, so it's at least that long. Philip might be able to answer further back than that.
Philip, would you?
I've got nothing further to add. I mean, I wasn't involved until in terms of this specific policy until probably 2 LTPs ago, where I did review it and make some some changes to ensure it was legally compliant.
Thank you, Councillor Foley.
Thank you for that. So basically, it hasn't been done for a long time, but quite an important process. And while this policy in isolation doesn't change the total rating pool, if you like, for the organisation, it does impact our constituents. So when we started this process, did we always set out to make the consultation period from the 1st of December to the end of January? Because I just feel like to get really good engagement, it's probably not the best time of the year.
No, it's definitely been impacted by the cyclone. So we have, it was intended to do it in October. And the intention was to adopt the final policy in the end of February. So we've lost about, 2 months? And primarily because of the cyclone, we stopped working on it during the response. It is important, and one thing we set out to do at the start, and we signalled early, was to do it in between long-term plans, so that the ratepayer can distinguish between what's driving the change in their rates. Is it a change in costs or levels of service, or in this case, is it a change to the policy settings? So that's why you do it in between LTPs. We have tried to work within that philosophy of doing it in between an LTP cycle. So that's why we have landed in December and January, and we have pushed it to 8 weeks. Normally it would be 4, in recognition that it's an awkward time of year.
Thank you. Councillor McIntosh.
Chair, I'm happy to move.
Do you have a question?
Yes,
Councillor Williams? Sorry,
we get to
question
that.
and then we'll come back. Yes.
Sorry, this is a bit of a tricky one probably, but one of the things that's been vexing my mind is the cumulative impact of the various reallocations of
rating burden, for example, the sustainable management one that Councillor Harding mentioned, into a more urban context, and the transition to capital value for public transport, and ensuring that that's consistent across all our flood schemes. I find with interest for horticultural properties, if you look at the table on page, there is a question coming, by the way. Phil might be best placed to answer it. On page 9, that I guess putting all those things to one side and just focusing on the movement of the general rate to capital value, horticultural properties are actually, it seems, better off under capital value than under land value in terms of the overall increase in rates. And I'm just wondering what might be behind that. Is it to do with the assumed ratio of capital value to land value for the average property? I just would have thought that if a horticultural property was well developed, if you like, with structures in place for viticulture, kiwi fruit or whatever it might be, that the capital value position for a horticultural property might be worse than under land value. So any insights on what's going on there? Phil, you might be able to.
Through the chair, it would, and this is the trouble you've highlighted, is that different horticultural properties have a different capital value. And I don't want to be specific because when you get to specifics, that's when it's you get yourself into trouble. But the issue is it's about the total development across the whole of the region. So you've actually also seen a change to general rates to more residential and commercial. That could be part of it. And also that it's about, you're right, it's about the average. So while, yes, horticulture does have a higher capital value than pastoral, it's not significantly different than other developed, and I don't mean pastoral's not developed, but other intensively developed properties such as residential and commercial properties. So that's probably the reason why you're seeing it. I think the other cumulative impact is that there are probably properties that were paying a higher rate in terms of some of the river and drainage schemes, and because we've moved those to a more capital value, which has probably spread that cost over a greater number of properties. So and also moved it to general rates. So it's not just, you can't just point the come down to one specific factor that has actually led to that specific change. I hope that sort of is a roundabout way, but basically there is no one factor you can actually say that is the reason. And I think I would be cautious to say that all horticultural properties will be better off. There will be some that will be, and then there's some that won't be. So that's unfortunately quite a specific issue for each individual property. Hope that makes sense.
So just my understanding is, don't look at the shift in the general rate in isolation. Think about how it all works together, including, for example, some of the sustainable management that was previously a greater burden on the rural community shifting into town.
Correct.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Harding, a question?
No, I'll have a comment later on, please.
Okay, that's fine. So we'll go back to Councillor McIntosh.
I'm happy to move, Chair.
Happy to move all the recommendations from 1 to 3. Can I please have a second to support that? Councillor Sears, thank you. Would you like to speak to the recommendations?
Yes, so look, I just want to endorse all the work that's gone into it, both prior to this council and with this council too, and the thoroughness of the work that the staff have done, and indeed the thoroughness of the papers and the community consultation document. What I do really want to urge and comment really strongly on is for people receiving this document, especially those who get the specific communication, and I'm really pleased you're doing that to those individuals, those that are particularly affected, to actually don't be like me, get engaged and read it. By don't be like me, I'm prefacing back to prior to my time at the council, where you kind of tend to let this thing bubble along, and then you get your rates bill, and then you're upset. There's a very strong desire amongst the council to ensure that whatever people come back with is noted, and if necessary, amendments will be made as a consequence of that. As Phil said earlier, there are always winners and losers in this sort of thing, so we need to know about that. We need to have a really good handle on the extent of that, so that's where the submissions process is important. And there's also a rates remission process which can be engaged subsequently as well. So my plea to receivers of this information, especially those that are significantly affected, is get engaged. You only actually need to read about the first 6 pages of the consultation document, and you've got a pretty good handle on it. If you need more detail, then you can read further into the document. So please be engaged.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sears?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Yes, well, I echo a big thank you to the team for the document, because it is really readable and well laid out so that you can actually understand it on a principles level, but also using the rates bill, actually look at your own personal impact from the changes. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. There are some big changes proposed, and I think that does come on the back of 12 or 14, maybe 16 years of these not being reviewed, and they may be changes that would have happened incrementally over that time had we been reviewing this more regularly. And I think it's been referred to the suggestion that we move some of the biosecurity and biodiversity work that's now primarily held by the rural sector as a shared rate across our whole community is one of those big changes. And I think it reflects an understanding that care for the biosecurity and biodiversity out in the rural landscape is going to need to be the responsibility of all ratepayers if we hope to make some real gains in those areas. So I hope that proposal will be received well, because I think that's a really good step forward for our community to be aware of the costs of the work that goes on out there and what we need to do going into the future. The proposed move from land value to capital value will be another big move for people, and they can understand through reading the documents the justification for us suggesting that. But again, as Councillor McIntosh says, that's the process by which we can hear from our community and from interest groups to understand individually those impacts, to see if they still sit with what we've proposed from a practical level, but also from a philosophical and theoretical level from this table. So I really look forward to hearing from those people, and I want to thank not only the staff but also the amount of work that's gone in through all these workshops to try and understand this has been very intense. It isn't something that's come out of 5 minutes of work. So anyone who is interested, as Councillor McIntosh says, reading this document, I think will understand the levels of work. I haven't gone through all the big changes, just those 2 particular ones of interest. And I'm really looking forward to receiving submissions, both written and in person.
Thank you,
Kia ora.
Councillor
Thank you, Chair.
Sears. Councillor Harding?
Kia ora, Chair. Look, firstly, and I'm on page 9 of the consultation document. And the first thing I want to say is, look, this had a couple of iterations, this consultation document, and I'm very happy and grateful to the staff, everyone involved, that it's now reached a point where there's good clarity trying to tease out a variety of different changes going on here. And so I'm confident I can say to the community, this clearly expresses their change in capital value, or the proposal to go from land value to capital value for general rates, and the basket of other things, and highlight some of the key movers there. But this is difficult to understand for anyone, for all of us. It's been a struggle, but this, I think we've done the best job that we can in teasing out the changes.
There are, and also embedded with that, there are so many different decisions, particularly around who shares the burden and on which basis, some capital, some land value. There are some rates that are still attached to land value for good reason. I do want to say I'm going to get to my grumpiness around some of the capital value in relation to the general rate in a minute, but there are some things where capital value is completely appropriate, and a move to capital value for flood protection, and the recognition that all of us in a flood protection scheme benefit strongly from that is cannot be lost on anyone in Hawke's Bay. So that's a sound relationship, but I can't agree with my colleague Councillor Sears that concept extends to the idea that urban ratepayers should be paying for improved land management practices on privately owned rural land, which is what is embedded in these changes and is the single biggest driver from transferring rating obligations from the rural sector, from the pastoral sector, on to particularly the urban sector. And so the effect of this is, for Hastings, 18% increase for urban residents, 29% for horticulture, and a 24% reduction for pastoral. And my contention is
Point
that...
of order, Madam Chair. We're actually not debating the proposal. What we're doing today is actually endorsing the consultation document. The debate's already been had.
I
So
think
actually really
that works to come, and we can have this debate after we've
submissions
heard from the public, and we can have that debate then, but predetermining is probably a bit early.
What I'm attempting to do, and if you can give me an indulgence of 2 minutes, I'm attempting to signal to the public to help them to interpret this document and understand where the levers of change are.
Yeah, but I think you're highlighting significant parts and not the whole, which the consultation document does. So if we can please leave that specific discussion to the right time, which is not quite yet.
We'll come back on that.
Thank you. Councillor Williams?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and let me know if I stray in similar vein. I'm really just wanting to draw to the attention of the people that Councillor McIntosh was concerned about, things that they might want to look out for and really get an understanding of this document, which I have to say I think is an incredible piece of work, and I totally commend the staff for the way it's been prepared. What you were trying to explain through this document in 22 pages is enormously complex, and it has taken close to 2 years for us to work through it bit by bit. As Councillor Foley pointed out, this isn't about how much, it's about where the burden lands. And I guess what I'm really wanting to hear about, because it does affect ultimately the capacity of our communities and different parts of our community to bear the overall rates burden that we're increasingly being required as an organisation to levy on our communities as a whole. And if I could just put that into context, I guess one of the great ironies for local government funding at the moment is that there was a lot of talk in the general election about a wealth tax. Well, this is a wealth tax. And if we move to a capital gains tax, excuse me, we move to a capital value proposition, it becomes perhaps more linked to wealth than it was, perhaps, although that's contestable. But just to the broader point is that local government funding is broken, as Local Government New Zealand keeps saying, and unless we get rescued by the likes of the GST rebate, we are going to need to think very carefully about how our communities can actually bear the burden of what we're going to need to charge, however efficient and effective we want to be, to do our job. And so this is actually a really important conversation because the burden overall is getting bigger, so where do we put it? And to give an example of that, we are moving, let's take the sustainable management issue or land management issue of concern to Councillor Harding. some of the burden of broader biodiversity control like possums into town. And we're doing that on the assumption that everyone in this region benefits from a healthy environment, from a strong and thriving overall biodiversity in the region, and it's not really just about keeping farmers free from tuberculosis as a control, as opposed to, say, rooks and rabbits or whatever it might be. And the point about me raising that is that for a given percentage rate increase, at the moment, there is quite a big burden falling on our farming community, pastoral in particular, at a land value proposition. A very small change in percentage rates increase in absolute terms can be thousands of dollars. That same percentage rate increase for me in Napier might be $10 or $20. And so by making decisions about where we put that rate burden, we're actually doing something really important about the resilience of our communities to withstand increases in rates and the ability of this organisation to fund itself for a given overall spend. And so I think what we're really wanting to hear from our communities in particular is to test whether the assumptions we've made about their ability to withstand the particular allocation of that burden is right, because we have necessarily made some assumptions. If I take, for example, the move in the general rate to capital gains tax, I think we're all wanting to hear.
I did it again.
I've said it again, haven't I?
Land value to capital value.
Land
Anyone
value
who's
to capital
listening?
value. Okay, there was nothing Freudian in that slip, I assure you. Is the assumption that we have made, for example, that if you've got a higher capital value, you've got a greater capacity to earn and therefore withstand the rates burden? Tell us about what you think about that. Do you agree that if you are a well-developed orchard, you are placing a greater burden on the environment than if you are a block of dirt with squash growing on it? Tell us about what you think about that. Buried in the midst of all of that and some other examples other than moving possum control into town, we have, for example, for public transport, which is dear to my heart, made an in-principle decision to consult on capital value for that proposal, because there is the prospect that the more developed a piece of land is, say it's an office block, the more employees will be in that office block, the more people needing to travel around the city between their homes and places of work that could be serviced by public transport, the greater burden on the road resource. Tell us what you think about that. And for flood protection, there's a really important one there where it's to do with affordability. There's all sorts of ranges of spread between targeted and general rate across our flood protection schemes at the moment, but as we've just learnt with Cyclone Gabriel, some of the communities that are affected by the lack of adequate flood protection to meet future needs are very small. And if we don't spread or democratise that cost in the way that we're proposing, say to 30% general rate, those communities simply won't be able to afford, with all the government support in the world, our share of what's required to make their communities safe. So we want to hear about all of that. I do have a totally open mind, as I'm sure my colleagues do, about whether the various main changes we're making are the right thing to do. And I guess the one that will interest a lot of people is the move to capital value for the general rate. But do look at it in the round. I am concerned, for example, whether a house in Waipawa can really handle a 47% rate increase. And, that's an example of where, if you think the burden has fallen unfairly on you, tell us about that. The ultimate test for us under the Local Government Act is to ensure that this model is one that promotes future social, economic, environmental and cultural wellbeing for our communities. So that's the litmus test that I'll be applying in thinking about the submissions to come. Thank you to the staff for the work we've done. Thank you to my colleagues for the very careful and patient way we've worked through all of this over the last 2 years.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Roadley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to put on record that the Have Your Say consultation. It is really important. Councillors and staff are absolutely committed to hearing from our communities. I'm also very aware that within my constituents, technology is a barrier for many whānau, and we invite you to make use of the paper documents which will be sitting at our offices in Wairoa. And please reach out to your councillors. We are here to listen and maybe navigate and bridge a path for you to have your say. Get involved. We really need to hear from you and want to hear from you.
Thank you, Councillor Roadley. Any other speakers? Councillor Curtin, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make a couple of brief comments. The first is to congratulate the staff involved and recognise that we've got in the engine room some really, really capable, competent people that are really giving us good information when we needed it through this process. A long, elongated process. So thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Beth. Really, really competent provision of information, and of course Desiree leading that team. So thanks to the staff. Chris, well done. It's been a hard road. The second comment is that from my exalted position, having sitting around here for a number of years now, I'd like to also acknowledge my colleagues for the greatest engagement I have seen in this process and understanding and taking the time to understand the grave complexities involved. And the comment I'd make here is that once you've gone through the process, you can't unsee or unhear what you've been through. You gain a great insight into if you like, the mechanics and the effects on people for the decisions that you make subsequently. So a great, if you like, initiation to council by simply going through this process. I look forward to the outcome. Delighted to see the socialist in me coming out and seeing capital gains. Capital value being on the table for consideration, and I wait with bated breath for the if you like, the debate that'll go around it. I'm sure there'll be different views, but we owe it to the people that write the cheques to hear what they've got to say, and then to make a call on that. So on that basis, Madam Chair, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Curtin. Right of reply, Councillor McIntosh. So if we return back to the recommendations 1, 2 and 3, which 3 includes delegating to the Chief Financial Officer, Chris, the final approval for any further minor editorial changes. We have a mover and a seconder. All those who agree say aye. Aye. Those against? You'd like that recorded, Councillor Harding?
Yes, I would, thank you.
Yes. Carried, thank you. I'd also like to thank Vanessa and Philip, the exec, and also our Māori Committee and RPC members for being along the journey over 15 or so workshops. So kia ora koutou. Thank you. We move along to the recommendations from the Cyclone Recovery Committee. Councillor Sears, would you like to start us off?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Anyone who was at that meeting, I think that long day meeting, will be very surprised that you managed to capture that whole meeting in half a page. Unfortunately, the workshop at the beginning of the day wasn't started early enough for being open to the public, which was a shame, because we did start with the Future Farming Trust, Dr. Phil Schofield, talking about soil management practices and carbon sequestration. And it was a really fantastic discussion around the opportunities that are going to be coming in to the region with our Land for Life project, and opportunities around carbon and soil. And that led into quite a long conversation later in the committee meeting around pests, particularly deer, and we picked up that committee wants to dip a bit more into that next year. Haven't had a chance to tell Mr Maxwell about that. And the big, of course, move was the change from the Cyclone Recovery Committee reverting back into EICC from next year. And it was made quite clear by a number of speakers that there wasn't any suggestion that people weren't still in recovery, or actually right at this moment still, as in Wairoa, underwater. but more that a lot of the work that's come out of Cyclone Recovery Committee now will be falling into the business as usual work streams that we traditionally see in Environment and Integrated Catchment Committee. So it finished with a big thank you again to staff and to councillors for all the work that's happened in that committee post-cyclone. We finished the committee meeting with the biodiversity update, and I mention it because it was brought to us again how critical the biodiversity projects and partnerships are going to be going forward. Hugely pressured financially with the recovery work streams, but how important this work's going to be for this council and for our community for the future.
A great committee meeting. Thank you, Councillor Sears. Would you like to add any further, Louise?
No, not really through you, Madam Chair, just to echo what Councillor Sears has said, that the work will continue. Recoveries are a long road still to go, and we will transition the BAU through the asset management team and the flood mitigations for the Category 2 communities and all the other recovery work. So that will continue, and we'll continue to report as is recommended in the paper to the EICC. Environment Integrated Catchment Committee.
Thank you. Any questions or clarifications from that meeting? If there are none, Councillor Sears, would you like to move?
Thank you.
And Councillor Roadley, second? Yes. Would you like to speak any further, either of you? Or Councillor Roadley?
No, I think that's all covered what Chair has said. It was a fabulous day. It was a very long there was a lot of content on the day, but really engaging, a real core business of what this council needs to do and does do. So, yeah. Thank you.
And a huge thank you to you, Louise, for heading that recovery committee work with your team for that period of time that we had it. So we are back to EICC start of next year. It's fantastic. If there are no other comments, would we like to move? All those say aye. Aye. Those against? Carried. Thank you, Louise. Kia ora. We move on to our next item, which is the report and recommendations from the Clifton to Tangoil Coastal Hazards Strategy Joint Committee. That's a mouthful. Councillor Van Beek, would you like to lead us? We've got Chris up here as well.
Oh, it'd be very quick. Last joint committee only took half an hour, and the main key for us was just a change in our reference, which will come back to our council in due time, because the strategy also has an objective to look at what effects a tsunami would have, and of course we have no control over whatsoever over tsunami, and it has never been the intention of the strategy. So that the terms of reference, as you can see, has now been changed. Apart from that, we're busy with looking at the big conundrum, which is, as we have discussed before, funding, but also we're looking, of course, to go back to the public in February 2020. August 2024. And the major concern for us is whether we actually have everything in place for that consultation process, and especially our consultation with Tangata Whenua, having the partnership with Tangata Whenua to be able to actually go in August to the public. So that's our main concern. Apart from that, it's business as usual, more or less. Chris, you may have more to add.
Chris?
No, Chair, except there is a decision to make here, which is to formally adopt the terms of reference. There's a attachment which shows the marked up copy of the change. It's relatively straightforward.
Okay, great. Any questions for Chris? No issues around the terms of reference? There are none. Councillor Van Beek, would you like to move? Thank you. And a second, Councillor Harding. Thank you. All those who agree say aye. Aye. Those against? Carried. Thank you. Item number 8, the proposed 2024 schedule of meetings. Who would like to lead us on this? It's quite self-explanatory, but Leanne, anything interesting to add?
Not really. There have been a couple of minor changes to the risk and audit dates at the beginning of the year, and other than that, I think that everything else is as it was proposed. And those changes to the risk and audit are just to ensure that the chair is available.
All right. Are there any questions or major concerns? Yep, happy to move. And second?
Seconding comment.
Would you like to speak?
No. I think
I just want to acknowledge and appreciate the week off, at least during the school holiday period. Just those of us with kids, it just makes life a lot easier. Thank you.
Duly noted. Okay, all those who agree say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Thank you. Councillor Remuneration, who would like to lead out on this? Leanne?
Again, me?
You?
Sure. So this paper is the result of the change of chair for the Corporate and Strategic Committee, and retaining the position as a HBRIC councillor director at the same level as a role with additional responsibilities. So I've prepared two propositions, and then the recommendation has been put forward as agreed with the chair. So, and if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Questions or clarifications on the paper and the recommendations? There are none. It's quite simple. I think it echoes the way in which we set remuneration at the start of the term.
I just have one question. I think the paper at the back, the attachment, is an old councillor director role description. It talks about there being 2 independent directors, and it doesn't have the detail referred to in the paper. So I think we may be dealing with a more up-to-date.
Yeah, would you like to?
Yes. So I am aware that the job description that we did pull together for this paper will be amended before it goes forward to the remuneration authority.
Thank you.
Thank you. You can move Councillor Sears and Councillor McIntosh, happy to second. Any further?
Which option are they moving? As recommended.
As recommended, sorry. Yep, so that's 1, 2 and 3. Yep. Would you like to speak, Councillor Sears, Councillor McIntosh? Any other speakers? There are none. All those who agree say aye. Aye. Those against?
Abstain.
Carried. Abstain, sorry. Can we note abstaining Councillor Curtin and Councillor Harding? Thank you. We have the Local Government NZ Special General Meeting item. This has come about off the back of the Future of Local Government review, recommendations and the consensus sought over 2 workshops within the LGNZ body. So we have now received the 5 motions to go to this to the special meeting. This paper asks that we delegate for a councillor to represent our council position at that special general meeting. Is there anything to add, Nick, to that?
Through you, Madam Chair, all I would really say is that the Local Government New Zealand have pulled together the Future by Local Government in response to the previous central government initiative to commission a report on the future of local government. That reported and made a lot of constructive recommendations around things like participation and financing for local government. And central government really laid the challenge at the feet of local government to think about its future and to look to own that direction. As a result, Local Government New Zealand has worked across its constituent members to pull together a paper called Future by Local Government. And it has, without the detail of the recommendations, broadly 5 areas that it goes into. One of those around the whole government system and how local and central government could be better joined up. It talks about the financing of local government and the really challenging situation that I think councils right around the country, including this one, find themselves in, with the ability of communities to pay for ever-increasingly challenging service provision in the light of things like climate change. It talks about the role of councils in communities and community wellbeing and the critical role that they play. It talks about the importance of partnerships and working relationships with mana whenua and tangata whenua across the country. And it talks about the need to develop broader and more diverse engagement for communities with the work of councils. Those 5 sets of areas are about which there are, on which the report are based, I think are very sound, and there'd be no reason for this council to be concerned about supporting those broad recommendations.
Thank you, Nick. And I just echo the comments around supporting those positions, those themes as we move forward within local government, particularly with our partnerships here in the region and with central government. So we have recommendations. Sorry, are there any questions or clarifications within this item? If there are none, the recommendations are outlined. We have 1, 2, recommendation 3 looks to confirm a councillor to attend the special general meeting, and 4 is to agree that that councillor will be able to exercise the council's vote.
Just a question, Chair. Presumably the councillor exercising the vote is being instructed, if you like, to vote in favour of the consensus position?
Yes, we can include that in today's discussion.
Yeah, I mean, that's the implicit assumption.
That's the assumption.
So I just wanted to make a couple of comments on what I consider to be some fairly favourable aspects of that consensus position when the appropriate time is. I can do that now. I can do it after we've decided who's going.
Okay, well, nominations for who that councillor would like to. I am available to.
Are you available?
Yes. Yeah.
I nominate you, please.
Yes, you can. And a seconder, Councillor Williams. We'll deal with that first. So if there are any other nominations, no. All those who agree say aye.
Aye. Congratulations.
Better clear the diary for the 11th of December. Look, we'll just note those who would like to make comment for that general special meeting. So Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you. Look, there's some, I think, highly attractive elements of this consensus position, including the fact that it is one that's being attempting to be forged here for local government generally. When I saw the reference to a 4-year term of local government in a transformed system, that may have been recommended by the Future for Local Government panel itself, but I think it's a smashing idea, and I think central government could learn something from it. So you can actually spend some time with your feet under the desk getting things done. The point I made earlier in the context of the new financial policy or the revenue and financing policy is about the inability or the unsustainable nature of the current funding model, and I wholeheartedly endorse the notion that perhaps returning revenue from GST charged on rates and paying rates on Crown property could lessen that burden and equally reduce the need for us to impose a wealth tax when central government doesn't seem to be willing to go anywhere near it. I also endorse the need to fund and address capacity challenges facing iwi hapu in partnering as treaty partner and mana whenua roles in our development of new policy. That's just absolutely vital if we're going to get anywhere in meeting the aspirations for all of our communities within our local government resource management system, so I wholeheartedly endorse that. There does seem to be a nod towards regional deals in terms of regions coming up with what's really important to them and partnering with central government to deliver that. And I do like the idea of the Electoral Commission or at least assisting our electoral system so that it's more efficient in 21st century and people actually vote in it, which would be nice given the rates of participation in recent elections. So thank you, Chair, for those.
Thank you.
Chance to make those comments.
That's fantastic. Any further comments?
Just to
Don't you
endorse
said it all.
Councillor Williams, yes.
I go in there firmly confident. Thank you. Moving on to our next item, it is fixing the common seal. Any questions or clarifications for this item? Do you move that?
Yeah, point of order, Chair, I think we still need a mover and a seconder for the previous.
For the 4 recommendations.
We wholeheartedly endorsed you as representing us. But
Oh, thank you.
Do 1, 2, and 3.
Can we
1,
have
2, and 4.
I think I did say 1, 2, 3, and 4. But anyway, if we had Councillor Sears move and Councillor Harding second. 1, 2, 3, and 4. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carry. Thank you. Affixing the common seal. Any questions, clarifications for this?
I just have one question.
Yeah.
I've often read these papers with some curiosity, but item 1.1 says that there was an agreement for sale and purchase on the 17th of November, and then item 3.2 says that no single leasehold property was sold. Have we sold something that wasn't a leasehold property, or is 3.2 wrong?
Would have to take that as a follow-up, Chair. Simply the date of affixing, I suspect.
It could have been a cross lease. Oh, no cross lease was sold, sorry.
Just have a quick look and I can.
I'm not sure if it's really spectacularly significant in the grand scheme of things, but we are going to approve it, so it'd be good to get it right.
Susie can help us.
Hi everyone, through you, Chair. We have freehold and leasehold properties, so whilst we haven't had any leasehold instances, this possibly was a freehold in this instance. But I will come back to you.
Thank you.
So we're looking at 1.1 and how it corresponds with 3.2.
That's it. Perhaps we hold it.
One's an agreement to sale and purchase, isn't it? And the other's sold.
Oh, I see, so it just wasn't, in other words, it hasn't settled. Yeah, maybe the answer.
Okay.
That's the answer.
All right, well, if that's the answer, I'm happy to move.
Are you happy to second Councillor Foley?
Sure.
Those who agree say aye. Aye. Those against, carry. Good spotting, though.
Depends what the word sold means, I suppose.
We can carry on with you, Councillor Williams. We have the report from the Regional Transport Committee.
All right. Okay, I'll try and be brief, but just to be a bit of context here, what we're doing is we're putting together as our main work stream this year, and it has been a busy year for us as a committee, we hope fit for purpose in a recovery context new regional land transport plan, which in essence is our bid to the National Land Transport Fund for funding for what we consider to be the priority projects for taking transport and our transport system in this region forward. We have, as a substantial part of that, very much focused on delivering a resilient system, one that is multimodal and one that is emissions friendly, if you like, but equally really ensuring that we reach a position where never again are parts of our communities cut off during events of the kind we experienced in February. Now, with all of that said, you may be intrigued to find out or to read that the top 10 projects we're seeking funding for at paragraph 4 in that table are essentially roading projects. But there's two things about that. One is that those are only projects that are above $2 million. And so there could be an enormous amount of smaller projects, pedestrian lanes, pedestrian crossings, roundabout safety, cycle lanes and those sorts of things that complement the broader objective and policy framework I just mentioned about being multimodal, but don't trip that $2 million tag to be in our major capital bids. The other thing to note that in terms of the projects which are about the Tairāwhiti Wairoa resilience build and the Hawke's Bay Resilience Bill, these are massive capital projects. These are, this is a $6 or $7 billion spend over the years that it might take to complete them. The level of investment going into Hawke's Bay with some of this is pretty unprecedented. I've seen, or I've heard Ross McLeod say that we could be looking at the need for 7,000 workers in the region, additional in the next few years, which is going to put pressures on our, I guess some inflationary pressure within the system, but equally pressure on the workforce and pressure on housing. But we are bidding for as much as we can get to support that out of the National Land Transport Fund, bearing in mind that other money may come out of the last government's National Resilience Fund as well. In there is the State Highway 2, the 4 laning of State Highway 2, and the business case for, effectively the expressway. One of the key, lead-ins to that is the future form and function review, where we'll actually look at our transport system as a region and think about what road corridors and what transport corridors, including rail or whatever it might be, are serving what purpose. And once you've worked out the purpose, the function, you drive to the form, and the precise makeup, of the investment into that expressway flows from that. So I guess I'm suggesting that people don't make automatic assumptions that from Pakipaki to the airport is going to be 4-lane road corridor in the way you might imagine it now. It might be, but it might be invested in alongside some other corridors that are dedicated to other purposes like cycling and active transport, and we need to think about the position of rail. So that's what we're working on. Those are the projects that were essentially recommended to us by the technical advisory group experts within each of the Wairoa, Hastings, Napier and Central Hawke's Bay councils, and we'll be putting that out for consultation just after our consultation on the revenue and financing policy closes and before we start the LTP. And I did note the calendar we've just approved has got a fair bit of RTC hearing time in there. So it'll be a busy year next year as well, and we really look forward to hearing back from people.
Thank you, Martin. Okay, Councillor Harden.
Sure, Chair. Look, and thank you, Councillor Williams, for that fulsome introduction. And you did lead into the area I wanted to quiz you on for, I think it would be not just for my benefit, but many curious and concerned people, and it's the 4-laning of the expressway. So you've indicated, if I understood correctly, that there is a process, a future form and function consideration. Just maybe you can just explain and possibly, because what I'm looking for is confidence that this particular project is not simply going to be steamrolled by political expediency, for want of a better word, and that the concerns of those of the community who worry about roads simply being built and then covered in more cars and only providing temporary relief are addressed. So I think what we all want is efficiency in Hawke's Bay, but we want future fit efficiency. So I'm vitally interested in assurance that some really sound future fit thinking will inform these major bills. Thank you. Is that a question to me?
Oh, that's a hard one. Or if
I'm
you think you can answer
I'm happy to respond, but I mean, I think you somewhat overestimate the capacity of my office.
It's like Katrina's not even here to answer.
To some level, this will depend on, Minister Simeon Brown's funding and the government's priorities for roads of national significance and those sorts of things, and their aspiration for taking Hawke's Bay forward. I would imagine, in terms of what we were just talking about before, partnership between local government and central government about these things is in line with their regional deal arrangements. But that's precisely why we wanted to go into that conversation in an informed way through the form and function review, so that we're not just looking at that that corridor in isolation with the wider transport system. So if for reasons of freight and commerce, it is the very best thing, looking at it at system view and resilience and emissions as a region, to do that, then all power to it, but not just for its own sake and in isolation. We will certainly do our very best to have that conversation with central government that welcomes and embraces the funding support, but seeks to look at it in that bigger picture. That's the assurance I can give you. What becomes of it is somewhat beyond my control.
Thank you. I will take that as an assurance that there's some hope that the fact that we put together a regional transport plan is not completely wasted and not completely lost on central government politicians. Thank you.
For sure. Thank you. Councillor Van Beek.
Yeah, thank you for the time. As the Deputy Chair of this particular joint committee, and fellow councillors from last term may remember, I'm really seriously keen on actually more or less what you're proposing, Councillor Harding, is that I would love to see a strategy, a transport strategy developed in Hawke's Bay that actually takes every mode of transport in consideration, takes every piece of road in consideration, and see if we actually can make Hawke's Bay more livable. And so not for the sake of it get tar seal, but see if we actually can transform some of the tar seal in a way that we actually can reduce our emissions and at the same time still keep transport and freight moving. And I think we always have worked at Hawke, and I still believe we work at Hawke, and that's due to, as Martin said himself, although he's got some really clear thinking on this, he is not the architect of it. He can drive and he can steer, but he's not the architect. But I believe if we as a joint committee, as a transport committee, we can put a strategy in place. But some really clever thinking people from around the world, I would say, I think would be far better off than what we've planned right now. So that's what I'm a proponent of, and I think it's still very necessary that we look into this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Van Beek. Councillor Curtin.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm sure this will be in Councillor Williams's orbit, given his broad knowledge of the process. I'll go to paragraph 3 of the paper, and in terms of the 8 evaluation criteria, is there a Cyclone Gabriel sobriety criteria in there in terms of resilience for the network, the lifelines, the connections between Napier and Hastings, heights of those bridges, raising those, in other words, making those regional interconnections much more resilient, given our experience of 8 months ago?
Yes. I think the point I was making earlier is that the evaluation criteria were very much nested in our strategic objectives as a regional planning committee, which largely drove out of the first workshop we had post-Cyclone Gabriel, which was ensuring that we always have a transport corridor open, ensuring that the resilient network we build is builds in capacity for multimodal and integrates with all natural hazard management, including flooding. So bridges and railway lines, future investment in them, respects what we're doing with our flood protection schemes, the coastline and all that sort of thing. So alignment with the government policy statement, which has also got a very strong resilience focus, was another one of the assessment criteria. So yes is the answer to your question, and I would say that that was probably a dominant part of the decision making that informed those projects.
And just a brief follow-up in terms of the installation of charging stations, etc., to take account of future growth of electric vehicles. Is there any consideration in there for the land transport priorities to include it, or is it excluded from
That's in our adoption of the transport chapter of the emissions reduction plan as a specific action there. I think it may be in one of our policies for a low emissions. One of our strategic objectives is a low emissions. Alongside the resilience one, there is a low emissions system. And I have reached out to Katie Nimmin to excite a conversation, I guess, platforming off their policy of rollout of EVs nationwide. And I would love to make, I'm a Napier Ward councillor, this a model city, as well as being Art Deco and the place to come for mission. Know that you can plug your EV in here when you get here and don't worry about battery capacity and have that anxiety. I would like us to be able to market and trade off that as well. If Hastings can do the same thing, great. But I'm hoping to meet Katie very shortly about that.
Thank you. Any further questions? Nick, would you like to add and summarise things?
Through you, Chair, I just think worth highlighting for council that the really significant role I think that the RTC is going to have over the next 24 months, building on the conversation that members have just been having. If we look at the new government, the highest levels in cabinet have got transport planning and infrastructure sitting in those first few seats around the cabinet table. So the new government has got a strong focus on infrastructure and intergenerational infrastructure planning. We're also seeing a new regional infrastructure fund sitting under Minister Jones's portfolio. Does the recovery work and the resilience work that members have just been talking about, and things like our regional freight strategy for the region that's now out. So it feels as though that the role of the RTC as the kind of planner, integrator, and kind of giving expression to our partnerships, whether with central government agencies or more locally with TAs and so on, is going to be really heightened over the next 18 to 24 months. So, yeah, certainly an important way forward for us in that committee.
Thank you. Would you like to move, Councillor Williams? Thank you for answering those questions. Councillor Van Beek, are you happy to second?
Yes, no problem.
Thank you. Any further comments? Here are none. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you, everyone. That is coming to an end. We have our minor items. Sorry, I'm just finding the run sheet here. Yep, we are up to minor items. So, Councillor McIntosh, Zone 3 meeting.
Sure, just to report back briefly on that, Chair. So I attended that a couple of weeks ago in Waipawa. And, you know, one of the good things about that is being able to rub shoulders with all your colleagues. But as part of that too, they all gave us a presentation on important things in their patch, and sort of perhaps not surprisingly, although Gabrielle was 10 months ago, it continues to dominate the discussion. And not only the extent of it, which we know about it, but more importantly, the enduring nature of it. I mean, we hear a bit of that from Di and Charlie with respect to Wairoa, but we got a really good presentation from Gisborne as to what, you know, is happening now still to them, and the extent of the financial burden that is putting on them. In fact, they coined the phrase, which got a lot of mileage, of feed your backs. In other words, government, our hand is actually going to be out for quite a while yet because of the ongoing nature of the stuff that needs to be put right and cleaned up as a consequence of it. So that was the sort of main theme of what everyone had to say. At a completely different level and a more optimistic one, we had a fantastic presentation from a woman, Anna Mora of Parangaho, and they put together an environmental farm management plan for a catchment area there. And it was really gratifying to see the work that they had done. They had, I think, approaching 2,000 hectares under control now. A lot of that was to do with fleet tree planting, a lot of wetland work in there as well. And I just thought it was a brilliant example of a local community group picking up the ball, getting some assistance from the council, but not that much, and just making it happen. And it had morphed into an important community activity and meeting excuse, quite apart from the good work that they were doing. I thought it was a really excellent example of that happening.
Thanks for that. Thank Councillor McIntosh. Councillor Lambert.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, just an update from the Wairau Flood Protection Stakeholder Group. As a bit of background knowledge, here we are 10 months from Hurricane Gabriel, or Cyclone Gabriel. In that time, I guess people are wanting to move their lives back on, but many of the houses are still under a 2A category in Wairau. And earlier on, the government pledged funding support for that. And since then, there is a tripartite agreement between the Regional Council, Wairau District Council and Tātou Tātou Te Wairau. They have come together and used WSP engineering firm to come up with some models that would put forward some options for removing the 2A down to a 2C and eventually to a 1. As part of looking at those options, the tripartite agreed to establish a stakeholder group made up from various community members that have been affected by the flooding, and had their inaugural meeting on Monday, just gone. The CEO from Wairau District Council, Kitea Tipuna, outlined the aims of the committee, and basically they are to look at options that are workable and within the funding that will be available. And the scope of the review is really only around the Wairau area affected by the 2A category, housing categorisation. So one of the group is made up of representatives from the tripartite group and also from across the community affected by the flooding in Wairau itself, which included general community members, farmers along the river, businesses, and also marae members. And I think the modelling that was proposed has been informed by earlier consultation, and the group were given an initial look at what the options were and put their input in. And I think that the fact that we had that diverse group was really good, and quite a few options or questions were asked about the different options. And it is early days, but there were quite a number of options, and it's trying to come down to 2 or 3 over the next 3 months. And it really is early days. However, the group did ask that the modelling also include the weather events that have happened to date. And as we all know, there's been a few over the last 10 months, including the last week in particular. And in particular, this last weekend was a bit of a rough one because there was a huge slip brought down along the entrance to Wairau, and we lost one of our local boys in a car accident. The weather was atrocious. It was at night time, and the slip came down, and they didn't see it. They'd been into town, and they were returning home. So within that time, the slip happened. So our commiserations to the whānau currently at Raupunga. And our condolences to everyone, and our aroha to the whānau in particular. So I think one thing that the Kitea did put on the team is that all ideas are ideas, put them forward. Although there are limited options, there are quite a few people on there already that are thinking outside the box, and they're actually contributing really well. So I think the target is 3 months, so February next year. Hopefully we'll come up with an option to put forward, which will be looked at by the tripartite membership. So early days yet, we've been introduced to it, we've got parameters, and we've seen options, and people are putting forward ideas. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you for that update and acknowledgement, Charlie, but important piece of mahi, complicated. But that's probably why our work in the fossil agreement and land categorisation is crucial to get on with. So thank you for representing us on that stakeholder group. Also to you, Jock, for your representation as a Zone 3 member. Kia ora koutou. We now are at the period to move into public excluded. But before we do, can I please invite you, Leanne, to introduce us to the item, to the point as to why we are moving into public excluded, and then we can take any questions from there. Thank you, Leanne.
So the reasons that this item, the confirmation of the minutes is put into public excluded is because the very nature of the minutes is reporting on the individual items that were in public excluded for the specific reasons given. Most of it was around the privacy and then negotiations. And so there's nothing unusual about this, having already resolved the reasons when we considered the items in public excluded at the meeting.
Fantastic, thank you. Quite straightforward. Are there any questions? If there are none, can I please have a mover, Councillor Foley, and seconder, Councillor McIntosh, to move into public excluded? All those who agree say aye. Aye. Those against, carried.